All right, basics of a sine and cosine graph. We're not going to look at graphing as much as an equation today. The big thing is don't worry about it sine or cosine. It's the same either way, so it doesn't change anything. So here's the basic setup. You'll see the sine and cosine. We're just going to, the letters don't matter. Um, so we're going to kind of focus on this A, the B, the H, and the K. And we're going to talk about what that's going to be. So here's what's going to happen. So again, this would be a sine or cosine. So the amplitude is going to be the high and low of the graph. So when we did this before, we did this part right here, the amplitude is going to be how tall it is and how low it is. It'll be the same number. So when you see that, that's what's going to happen. And we just find that by the absolute value of what's ever in front of the sign, or that A right there. The period is going to be the distance for it to make one sine or cosine graph. So for it to make a cosine graph, I want to know the distance from here to here, and that's what the period's going to be. And we just find that by 2 pi divided by whatever is there. The phase shift or the horizontal shift is going to be the idea of the horizontal distance the graph moves. So if we have an x-axis, we can start at the origin. That means there'd be no horizontal shift. If we start over here, we'd have a positive shift. If we start over here, there'd be a negative shift. And the vertical shifts mean the same idea. It's going to be the idea of saying, are we going to start at the origin, or are we going to start up, or are we going to stop down? And that's going to be the vertical shift. All right. All right, so what we want to do is we want to find the amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift of this function. So if we want to find the amplitude, those will be all my letters. They're off a little bit. Should be shifted just a little bit. So right there, 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 and there. All right. So the amplitude is going to be the A. That's the beginning. So it's going to be the absolute value of 3. So my amplitude is going to be 3. Whoever that first number is, I just find the absolute value of it. The period is going to take the idea of that second number there, that B, right? And it's always going to take 2 pi divided by that B. So here we're going to say 2 pi divided by 2, and our period is going to be pi or 1 pi. Now the horizontal shift, the phase shift, and the vertical shift, here we're going to take whatever that H is. Notice there's nothing over here, right? So there's nothing over there, we're going to take the opposite of that, and there's nothing there, so it's going to be 0. So if there's nothing being added or subtracted inside the parentheses, there's no phase shift. Same thing with the K here, the vertical shift. The vertical shift is going to be the K. There's nothing on the outside of the parentheses, so it's going to be 0 also. So there's our 4 things: our amplitude, our period, our phase shift, and our vertical shift. All right, same idea on this problem, right? I'm going to do this kind of idea. It's off a little bit again. A, B, and then H, and then K. All right. So for our amplitude, it's just the absolute value of that outside number, right? So it's a 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5. Period, same idea. Whatever that B is going to be, that B is going to be the number here on the inside of the parentheses right before the X. So I'm going to sit there and say it's 2 pi divided by that. So here, 2 pi divided by 1/2. This can sometimes mess us up as a calculator. All right. So I would say sometimes take 2 pi and divide it by 0.5. All right. So sometimes it'll mess you up here. But it's going to be 4 pi. So if you see that idea, sometimes 2 divided by 1/2, sometimes it'll mess up a little bit. You'll get the answer of, being 1, right? But it's actually 2. So we want to make sure that's in parentheses. So if you put the fraction in there, put it parentheses, divided by 1 divided by 2. So just be careful of that. Here now there is something here in the inside of parentheses, something added. That's going to be our horizontal shift. That's our H. So what's going to happen is I want the opposite of that. So since it's a positive H, then what's going to happen, I'm going to get a negative H as my phase shift. The horizontal shift is always opposite. So that pops up. The horizontal shift, the phase shift is always an opposite function, or opposite of the idea of the parentheses. So it happens all the time. Here, there's nothing on the outside of the parenthesis. So nothing on the outside of the parenthesis says our vertical shift is going to be nothing. All right, and finally, all right, this problem, make it a little bit more just difficult. All right, so our amplitude is going to be this A right here. So I'm going to take the absolute value of that -2, and the absolute value of -2 is 2. All right, this messes it up a little bit when it comes to the period, right? So I want to find this B, right? Notice there's no number in front of this X. So if there's no number there, it's just a 1, right? So on this problem, I'm just going to 2 pi divided by 1, and so my period is going to be 2 pi. So that just happens if there's no number in front. All right, the period can't be 0. So what happens is it's going to be 2 pi here. All right, the phase shift is going to be this right here. That's going to be my h. All right, and so remember, I want the horizontal shift is always opposite. So I want the opposite of -2h. So I'm going to get a positive 2h. And then I'm going to have my vertical shift. And that vertical shift is always going to be whatever's on the outside. And it just is whatever that is. So the vertical shift is 5. So it's just going to be 5. And there's our amplitude, period, phase shift, vertical shift. So try a couple of these, see how you do, and then feel free to come ask me some questions.